Joe Biden and the Democrats said they want to fundamentally change this country. I don't believe what y'all understood what that means. They want to fundamentally change this country. Though this cancel culture and all this stuff that's going on, that's part of it too. I don't believe y'all really understand how deep this goes. If you have a chance, y'all probably would that you would go a different route, I believe. But I want to show this video of how they are destroying everything. Well, you be the judge. Hold up, let me show this man and this lady just talk, husband and wife.
Hi guys, welcome to Grow Up. My wife and I, we wanted to address the Equality Act today. It's something we've seen a lot of conversation about. I want to make it explicitly clear I do not support the Equality Act. And in saying that, you can kind of see why this is such an insane bill and why it's built the way that it is. Nobody wants to say, I don't support the Equality Act. That sounds bad, you know? It's like nobody wants to not support equality. Everybody's like, equality, that's a nice word. We want people to, it's everything behind it in the semantics and the fact that it's not built around equality at all in any way, in any facet, any form. As a conservative, I believe in, having sort of those opportunities being equal as a child, and that's something we need to work hard on. But I don't believe in equal outcomes, and this bill has nothing to do with either of those things, though. It has nothing to do with it at all. They're taking a word and they're using it as a political prompt, as a political tool. So we want to explain a little about what the equality bill is actually doing. So you want to start?
Ironically, on Women's Day,
yeah,
this is what's so funny about this, is that this legislation attacks women in every facet, from girls' sports to how they identify, how they're going to be allowed to identify, what kind of role parents have in their own children's development. This is an attack. I would say the Equality Act is one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation I've ever seen in my lifetime show up in Congress. And here's why. It's basically one piece of legislation that has all of the leftist agenda baked into it, right? So you have the mandated gender and sexual education initiatives that schools will now be mandated to enact their policies and soon there. There's going to be promotion of abortion, things like that, as a human right, as a form of health care. All of these things that we disagree on fundamentally, and what makes us great in America is that we are at what point we're allowed to be free and have different opinions on, is now going to be mandated. And so this is a way for them to mandate their ideology, since those ideas themselves were not strong enough to just survive on their own.
Yeah, so if the Equality Act passes, there's a few things that I want to get into. There's the religious freedom part, which is really important. We'll get into that in a second. But I just want to point out that something very important, if you have kids or you're an uncle or an aunt and you have nieces and nephews, one of the things that the Equality Act would do is it would trigger a mechanism that would allow the federal government to take funding away from schools if those schools did not comply with the act. So that would mean, no matter what part of the country you live in, how conservative or, liberal it is, it doesn't really matter. You're all going to be treated with the same rules in respect to allowing anybody to choose their gender and play sports with people who are not their born sex. So whatever you were biologically born as, you would no longer have to play with. You could just choose to play with something else or somebody else, some other group. That's something I know a lot of parents, especially in conservative areas, are very opposed to, and it's something that even quite a few liberal parents that I've met are opposed to. So it's something that should be on your radar, that's something that this would do. That's not equality. That's changing the very nature of the way that we've viewed competitive athletics with children for pretty much the entire existence of modern sport for amateurs. So that's something that, it's very serious. The religious freedom aspect, though, is something I think is probably the most significant change, because essentially it would say churches have to violate their faith. And that's a big, big problem here. So I've talked to pastors all over in the state of Tennessee. They're all concerned about this act, and some of which are not super conservative people, but they're concerned about this, because this this does have not just the immediate effect, but the long-term effect of setting a precedent that the government can step in here and change the way that your religious freedom works, and essentially have like a bigot clause saying, hey, if we decide you're a bigot and you don't do exactly what we tell you, you could face ramifications. So it would force a church to have to hire against, their own values. So if they have a school, let's say, for instance, a Christian school, and that school's hiring for a principal, and they go out there and they, say, hey, we're opening this process, send in your applications. They could have somebody apply who's vehemently opposed to their values, but checks all the other boxes, and say nobody else applies, or a second or third person applies, and they also may check the boxes, but are, values opposed. And in a normal setting, that school would say, you know what, we're going to hold off. They would then have grounds for a discrimination suit saying that, this is not, this is not fair, and the church doesn't have the right not to hire us just because we don't share the same values they do. And so that's a space we can't get into. And I think this is somewhere where when they got into the marriage equality stuff, things got off track, because people would start to they would conflate the two issues, and they would say, well, one means the same as the other. And it didn't mean quite the same thing there. Under this context, though, this is about the very, very nature of religious freedom. It would be taken away as a result of the Equality Act. So the concern in churches is astronomical, and I think that they have every right to be very concerned about this, because this is something that could change the very way that churches, sort of have autonomy in America to practice their faith. And it's not just one faith. This is all faiths that are under threat by a bill like this, because even if it doesn't affect your church, it affects the very fundamental freedom that allows your church to operate. And so that's really the number one reason for me, and there's many reasons, but that's the number one reason as getting into politics, that I could not support this bill under no circumstances, because anything that threatens freedoms in this way is just, it's un-American in my view. But then you go into the other issues as like a woman, one of the interesting things I read going deeper into this bill is that it would allow, say in a hospital setting, a nurse who was born a male, and then could maybe say that they don't identify that way anymore later on, that they would then, potentially be placed in a position where they would do what would generally be a job where you would expect a female to do it with you, like say an OBGYN appointment as a nurse or whatever it is, that you may be put in that position, and that the actual patient would be held to the same standard. Mm-hmm. That you would essentially have to, like, you better be comfortable with that, you bigot.
Well, also
and I don't think that's fair to women.
Well, certain hospitals also, religious hospitals, don't want to do abortions. They're not abortion facilities. Yeah, they want to have the freedom to help bring babies into life, not kill them. And they have the right to do that as of right now, but the Equality Act would prohibit them from that because of the way. See, the way that they worded this bill, it's very loosey-goosey, the very broad stroke terms, which give them power to define that later.
Yeah.
That's how it was intentionally written.
That's a great point, because that goes back to the difference between conservative justices and liberal justices, because they love broad laws more than anything. Because a broad law means it's a living document, and that means they love it being up for interpretation forever. And for them to be able to change the rules as they go along. That's why when you read this bill, you'll read it and you'll go, well, this seems kind of like very simple. But it's really not. You have to look at all the other laws that it affects. And that's where you get all these breakdowns. One of the things they do in the bill is they change the way that we refer to pregnancy in past bills, and they now refer to it as pregnancy and related procedures. What they're talking about when they say related procedures is abortion. It's another example of them using linguistics to trick people into feeling like there's no problem here. Because somebody who is, let's say, pro-life, read that bill and not have any idea that it has something to do with abortion. Right. And it does. All of those related services they're
this is a consistent theme that we see with the linguistic manipulation, just like we see with the CSE framework, which is the comprehensive sexuality education, which they'll call prevention-based, evidence-based, abstinence-based, and then you look at the actual education, and they're telling your child they can be any gender that they want, they can change it from day to day, that they should experience with their sexual fluidity, all of these ideas that you had no idea you were signing up for. So this is what they do, and that trust has been broken. As of right now, without the Equality Act, in some states, your child can basically your teacher and Planned Parenthood can conspire together to take your child without you knowing, without your consent, get an abortion procedure and other medical procedures without you knowing. So not only is this an assault on religious freedoms, women's rights, but it's also an assault on the family, on parental rights. We are now telling society, dictating society, that the parental role is beneath the role of the state and essentially teachers. So
and where do we see that? In what other countries do we see that sort of thing?
Communist countries, socialist
so
countries.
So strange how we start.
So it's very interesting because if you just theoretically, if you were somebody who had this intention to get rid of America, the way we do things, the legal way we do things, you would write a piece of legislation with very broad language that you could go and define later to be whatever you want. And anybody who criticized you for it or tried to hold you accountable, too late, the act passed and you're a bigot if you oppose it. They would get it done this way, okay? Because the other way doesn't work. They can't just go in and take over the educational institutions. They have to get us to consent to that by thinking, just like parents consent to sex ed in schools, thinking it's abstinence-based,
yep.
right? They're going to teach my kid about sex ed. They're going to teach them about biology, just the facts, and tell them how to prevent it from happening. That's not what they're teaching. So you pull back the layers, and it's always something different than what you're getting. The trust factor's already been broken. So why are we giving teachers and these academic institutions more power than a parent has over the decisions over what happens with their child's bodies, minds, and spirits?
Yeah.
We're essentially sacrificing our children for the Equality Act.
It's, I try to relate this to people all the time. I think one of the most dangerous things that we have to understand and be able to help other people, you're all activists. Like, you all have a job. Everybody watching, you all have a job, and your job is being able to relay this information to people who don't know, so one of the number one things that people need to know who don't know this already is that Democrats love to use linguistics. They love to use words to trick people. So when they use a name like the Equality Act, that is their whole marketing package. They depend on being able to have the headline that says, 43 Republicans voted against the Equality Act, to make us sound like we're just equality haters.
Like they were against equality.
And
it's like the puppies. Use the
exactly.
Puppies
No, that's what I was going to do. That's where I'm going next. So the thing I always tell people in person is I say, this is basically akin, this Equality Act is akin to me writing a bill called the If You Love Puppies Act and Want to Save Puppies, Vote Yes bill. Okay? And inside the bill, it actually is laden with things to kill puppies. But when you vote against it, I get to say, you voted against the Do You Love Puppies, Vote Yes bill. It's nonsensical. Obviously, you should vote against the bill because inside the actual bill, it's leading to puppy murder. But the name of it sounds so nice. How could you vote against it? And that's the way that they design so many of these bills. It's deception, it's manipulation wrapped in a lie within another lie within another lie. And as much as I wish we were playing on the same sort of level playing field here, we're not. They're not engaging in a real bipartisan effort to come to some sort of agreement on a problem. They can't even agree on what the problem is within their own party, let alone everybody else. And so until we can all unify around, hey, we have a set problem we need to fix, we can't come up with a solution. It's that loss of shared language, shared understanding of issues that is leading us to just absolute destruction on so many fronts, because we can't even identify what the problems are anymore. And that's number one, needs to change. So, I'd say this is sort of off topic a little bit from here, but with my own campaign, something we've talked about a lot is that I'm running in-depth policy things on every front. And I want people to know exactly where I stand. And I think too many politicians, they play the game where they're like, you want to have it both ways. I don't want to have it both ways. I want to tell you where I come from, how I feel about things, and I want to stand strong for those things. I'm not going to be one of those people that goes back and forth. So this is one of those examples on the Equality Act. I could absolutely never support a bill like this.
Well, this is also very anti-woman. We should touch on that because, me being involved in counter-trafficking, we have no safe spaces for women if you erase women's safe spaces.
Yep.
And some of these women, okay, first off, sex trafficking in particular, because I'm just going to focus on that right now, is a predominantly gender-based crime, meaning that most of the buyers are men, not women. Most of the victims are women, not men. So knowing those two facts and knowing biology, we need to be able to mitigate those risk factors and address them. They're very real risk factors. So when when you're saying that, recently the Women X thing, right? They're trying to degender language. They're trying to erase womanhood, saying that, now you're chest feeding, not breastfeeding. That birthers, not, a woman giving birth. Like, they're changing language and essentially erasing womanhood, femininity, all of the things that make us different. And one of those things that's really going to hurt women the most and make it the most unequal footing is the women that are the most vulnerable, who have been exploited in ways you can't even imagine, are now being told that they have to go to a facility where men will watch them undressed, help them with very personal, vulnerable, intimate, situations where they're supposed to be in their recovery and in a very trusting environment and supportive environment, which should be made up of other women. And if you know anything about trauma recovery, especially as with sex crimes and gender-based violence, that is very, very important piece to your recovery, is feeling safe. And we are taking that away from people that have experienced horrific abuse. Just on that reason alone, this legislation is garbage. It's absolutely erasing these safe spaces for women and children. And then you talk about what's being done to children as far as this is a very predatory scheme to transition children that are experiencing other vulnerabilities as well, and to message to them that this is a normal a normal intervention, right? So children as young as 9 years old who don't have a sense of identity. They don't even know if they like chocolate chip cookies or what movies. Like, they're still figuring out who they are. And now we're giving educators, call themselves educators, we're giving them access to our children's minds and their identity. Instead of teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, we're now giving them a license to be the authors of our children's identity and character. Okay, and the parents have no say in this, and to say, maybe you should explore your identity. Maybe you should explore your pronouns, because there's, this is not the role of educators. They're taking away parental authority, parenthood, and this is an attack on the family, on who is in charge of our children's minds and who's in charge of protecting them. Because we can't protect our children as parents from predators and from even teachers that see themselves as progressive social engineering arbiters. Okay, we can't protect our children from people if this is a legislation that gets passed. It then becomes law.
You reminded me of two things. One is that we didn't even mention this yet. This act, the Equality Act, it would also open things up for parents to have the custody of their children taken away if they do not agree to transition their child, if their child says they want to transition. So, we've gotten to a place where Disney just banned Dumbo and the Aristocats and Peter Pan for children under 7. Yet, we also are looking at passing a law that would require parents to comply with their 7-year-old if their 7-year-old says they want to transition their sex. That's nonsensical to me. And I think it's nonsensical to the majority of Americans. And so that's why I have no qualms at all saying that I can't support this. The second thing you reminded me of is, you made such a great point about, the fact that this affects trafficking victims. Same thing, domestic violence victims.
Absolutely.
Domestic violence victims would be put in the same position where they would be forced into, places where they're going to be stuck with biological males that could impede their recovery. That doesn't mean that the other people are not deserving of a place for their own recovery. They are. But biological women, they're entitled to this. They've gone through domestic abuse. They need a safe place to get better. And it's the same thing. The other thing too is drug rehab.
Yes.
Same thing with drug rehabs.
Yes.
They have, sex-based drug rehabs so that people who have those problems don't fall into worse problems. Mm-hmm. This also defeats that notion. So there's so many issues that are going to crop up from this. If they're able to convince 10 Republican senators to go along with this, I pray to God every day that they will not be able to get 10 Republican senators on board with this, because that's what they need in the Senate to pass. They already passed it in the House, so all they need is 10 Republican senators to get on board with letting this come through. We need our Republican senators to stand strong on the filibuster. Not one of them should move an inch for this act. It is horrific. It is something that will cause problems in America for decades. It's non-negotiable. It really, like, we have to have a hard line on things that are non-negotiable, and this is one of them. This is women having that space to be able to recover, and on our children having a place to be able to be children at their schools and not be forced to have, this very extreme gender theory pushed down their throats. That's something that's not negotiable. And I think that, we have to be really clear about that. Right. So
I also just want to use another example, sometimes it helps to understand what this translates to in real life. And I want to think, a particular situation, my daughter got her ears pierced this year, and I needed a birth certificate. I had to go there with her. I had to make an appointment. I had to show my ID to prove that I was her mother, all of these things, that we were related, and all of these things. I had hoops I had to go through. It is harder to get your own child as a parent, ears pierced at 12 years old, than it would be in some states. Okay, not all states, but this is where things are going, and the Equality Act will supercharge this initiative, is for them to get an abortion or transition, to get them on transition hormones. And I want to explain something really quick about what Planned Parenthood is doing, all right? They've been very quietly, behind the scenes, converting their whole thing, okay, to not just abortion being their bread and butter. Because think about it, abortion is kind of a one and done thing. And yes, many women have multiple abortions a year. But again, you're talking maybe 3 abortions a year. I don't know. I'm sure there's some crazy, stories where somebody's had more. Anyway, focusing on the thing, what they're turning into is a whole gender identity type of gender issues clinic. All right. They know there's so much money to be made in this. And just like they've done with targeting kids in the classroom with their sex ed, the radical sex ed, which sexualizes them and ensures that they're customers for life. Okay. All of that building that they've been doing since kindergarten with our children in schools, they're now doing that with the gender initiatives, with the sexual initiatives, with transitioning initiatives. All right. There's these agendas that they have because they make money. They make money. They stand to profit off of your child transitioning. So what I'm suggesting is, why are we having, say the owner of McDonald's be the person who teaches your kid about nutrition? Do you see the conflict of interest there? With Planned Parenthood, we invited them in the classroom to teach our kids about sex ed, and what did we see? We saw more teen pregnancies, more STDs, more sexualization of children, more grooming, more trafficking, all of that, including Planned Parenthood running, trafficking, supporting trafficking rings, people like that, pimps bringing in their girls, and them helping and looking the other way and facilitating, enabling rapes, incest, all of that, you name it. But now what they're doing is they're transitioning to be ready for this Equality Act to pass, for all of these gender curriculums to ensue and be mandated. So now their customers are ready and they're going to be in line. That's where this is about. And I want to warn parents, this is a very important aspect to understand that Planned Parenthood has. This is their long-term goal, because hormones, the whole nature of this, it's a round-the-clock thing. They need that kid's going to be there every week, getting their hormones, getting their psychotherapy, getting referred out to this person, this clinic. This is a money-making operation for them.
Well, scarier than that, it's the state taking over the parent role.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing that I think should concern every parent, no matter how you feel about other issues. It should concern you that the state feels like that's an appropriate step for them to step in. I've always been of the mind that less government is a better government. And I think that most people in practical sort of life experience know that to be true. Anytime the government does something, they tend to screw it up. But to sort of delve into solutions, I would say the number one thing I could ask people to do right now is reach out to your senators, reach out to especially the softest senators we have, people like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Mitt Romney. Romney's probably in the right place on this for I think he understands the religious concerns, but we still need to push all those people that are sort of soft Republicans to do the right thing and make sure they stand up against this, because this is just an absolute travesty of a bill. And if it were to pass, it would do such great damage for so long. I don't know that you could roll back the damage that it would do. And I don't say that lightly. There's not a lot of bills like that where you can say, oh, well, the damage it would do. HR 1 is another example of that. A bill that if it got through would do so much damage, I don't know that you could roll it back. And so that's what I ask of you. I mean, all we can do is be a sounding board. We do these things on our own time where we make the calls or write letters and all the stuff we can do, but we have our limits too. And so the next thing we do is go to you guys and ask you to do the same thing, because we do, and we have seen an effect. When we come together, we're a very powerful group when we all come together. And we've seen evidence of that on so many issues where you guys have helped move the needle. We just got, Williamson County here in Tennessee, they dropped their mask order. And that was after, the great work of Tennessee Stands, where I'm on the board and Lena's done a ton of work for. That's it works. It does work. It works when you come together and you make your voices heard. The left does such a great job of it, and we need to beat them at their own game and be loud and proud about our values and ensure that we're defending them, because
Democrats. It passed in the House. All the Democrats. Part of some, but anyway, it passed in the House. Stop voting Democrat. There's some soft Republicans out there. Don't vote for them either. But definitely stop voting Democrat. Stop it. Malcolm X said a long time ago. I ain't gonna say what he's. How you say? He said, a Democrat. He said a Democrat voter is a traitor to their race. It was something similar to that. A Democrat voter is a traitor to their race because of stuff like this. So a Democrat voter is a traitor to their race because of stuff like this. But now it's not affecting the black race. It won't affect the white race, the Chinese race, the Asian race, the Spanish race, the Latino race, the Irish, the Italian. It's going to affect every race in this country. Every race in this country. Stop voting Democrat.